My name is Martha Caldwell, and I have been married to Walter for 43 years. You would think, after 4 decades of sharing the same roof, the same bed, and the same ordinary battles of life, nothing could surprise me anymore. But surprises don't knock politely. They slip in at the quietest moments, like steam rising from a roast chicken on a Sunday afternoon. That evening, the house smelled of rosemary and butter, the kind of smell that convinces you life is steady. The chandelier above our oak table hummed faintly, its crystals trembling as if even light had nerves. Greg, our son, poured iced tea with the distracted air of a man who wanted to be anywhere else. I set out my mother's china, the plates I reserve for holidays, because family dinners deserve ceremony even when no one admits it. Elena, my daughter-in-law, was late, as usual. When she finally swept in, she placed one graceful hand on her stomach, smiling as though she carried treasure. She slid into the seat beside me, leaned close, and in a whisper, warm against my cheek, she said words that turned the evening inside out. "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby." The gravy ladle did not fall from my hand. The glass in my fingers did not shatter. I simply set the ladle back into the bowl and wiped the handle with the corner of my apron, a gesture so ordinary no one at the table noticed. Walter carved chicken with mechanical precision, his face calm but pale. Greg fiddled with his fork, the metal clinking too loud against porcelain. Elena sipped her water, her eyes gleaming with the kind of satisfaction that makes a person dangerous. I did not argue, did not gasp, did not give her the scene she wanted. Instead, I looked at her steadily and said, "Don't worry." My voice was cool, almost tender, the way you speak when you are tucking a child into bed. She blinked, caught off guard, and turned her gaze back to her plate. The roses outside the window leaned foolishly toward the fading sun, pink and stubborn. The chandelier kept humming. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower coughed into life. I lifted my glass and asked Greg about work, though my chest felt as if it were made of glass about to crack. And in that brittle silence, I made a promise to myself. If truth needed a door, I would be the one to open it. After the dinner ended and the last car pulled away from the curb, the house fell into that hollow silence I know too well, the kind that hums louder than conversation. I loaded plates into the dishwasher, listening to Walter out in the garage rinsing the carving knife. He always cleaned that knife himself, a ritual as precise as church. The faucet hissed, metal clinked, and I thought about Elena's whisper curling in my ear like smoke that refuses to clear. When Walter came back inside, he kissed the top of my head and asked if I wanted tea. His voice was steady, but steadiness can be a disguise. "Tea would be nice," I answered, folding the dish towel too carefully, lining up corners as though neatness could anchor me. He set the kettle on, patted his pockets, frowned when his hand brushed over his wallet. He found it finally, slipping it back with the tenderness of a man touching something fragile. He filled my cup with hot water, stirred in honey the way he always does, and asked how the roast tasted. I told him it was fine. He nodded, eyes somewhere else. Words sat between us like cards left face down on the table. Later, when he drifted asleep in his chair with the newspaper over his chest, I tidied the living room. The wallet he'd fussed over was tucked at the edge of the cushion. I meant only to slip a coupon under the flap. But when it fell open, a thick envelope of cash stared back at me. More money than we ever kept in the house. I closed it quickly, my fingers steady, but my stomach turned cold. Men don't carry envelopes like that unless they're paying for silence. The next morning, he laced his shoes and told me he had errands at the VFW hall. He smiled, too quickly. I smiled back, not believing. By noon. Greg called, his voice bright the way voices are when someone is sinking. He asked about borrowing hedge trimmers, about visiting soon. His sentences were painted in cheer, but the cracks showed. My son was holding something heavy, and Walter was bleeding money into an envelope. Elena's whisper rang louder. That afternoon, I walked the block just to clear my head. Daniel Ruiz, the young gardener who tended Mrs. Keating's hydrangeas, tipped his cap politely. A moment later, a car eased up, and Elena stepped out, carrying a bakery bag. She smiled at Daniel, handed him the bag, and in return he slipped her a folded slip of paper. She tucked it into her jacket like it was a key. Then she saw me. Her wave was casual, neighborly. My pulse banged against my ribs. That night, while Walter snored softly beside me, his phone lit the kitchen counter with a pale glow. A message appeared from an unsaved number. Don't forget Thursday. Same place. Bring what we discussed. I stood there in the dark, the refrigerator humming, my bare feet cold against the tile. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The words were already carved into me. Thursday. Same place. Bring what we discussed. Back upstairs. I slid under the quilt, my body stiff as glass. Walter shifted, murmured something about pancakes at the hall, and reached for me in his sleep. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the chandelier's faint reflection. Elena had dropped a bomb at my dinner table, and my husband's secrets were scattering like shrapnel. The first crack had formed. I only had to follow it to see where the whole thing would break. On Thursday, I parked 2 blocks away from the small coffee shop near the freeway, the one with neon lights that flickered even in daylight. I ordered a decaf I had no interest in and sat near the window where the glass reflected both the rain outside and the restless tilt of my own face. I was waiting to see if my suspicions had roots or if I had been planting shadows in my own garden. Walter came first. He was always early, a man who believed punctuality could shield him from suspicion. He sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup as though warmth might keep his story from going cold. A few minutes later, Elena arrived in her ivory coat, the one she wore when she wanted people to look twice. She didn't glance at him right away. She made a small performance of ordering her drink, as if the play only began when she decided to step on stage. Finally, she joined him, leaning close, her voice low and sharp, her hands moving like someone sketching a bargain in the air. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. I saw Walter's jaw tighten, his shoulders square in that way he has when he's cornered. Then I saw the envelope, thick, familiar, folded with the same precision I'd found in his wallet. He slid it across the table. Elena slipped it into her bag without hesitation, her smile bright enough to sting. A moment later, she stood, brushed her coat smooth, and left without a backward glance. Walter stayed, staring at his cup as if it might offer absolution. From the alley? Daniel appeared carrying boxes of pastries. His jacket was damp, his face worn. He didn't notice Walter. Why would he? To him, my husband was just another customer lingering in the corner. I watched as the manager handed Daniel cash, and he tucked it away like a man already counting tomorrow's hours. I left before Walter did. The windshield wipers beat steady across the glass, but my thoughts raced faster. By the time I reached home, I had written everything down in my spiral notebook: the time, the place, the coat Elena wore, the way Walter's fingers clung to the envelope. It felt strange, cataloging my life like evidence, but I knew now the truth wasn't going to volunteer itself. That evening, Greg stopped by with a grocery bag full of things Elena had forgotten. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled from the kind of day that stretches longer than it should. He asked to borrow hedge clippers, said his own were broken. I handed them over, but my eyes were on his. They darted, restless, the way dice roll across a table. His phone buzzed with a notification he tried to hide, but the shame already settled in the room like smoke. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Yeah, Ma, just work stuff." His smile was thin as paper. I let him go, but the pieces in my notebook had begun to form a pattern. Walter's secrecy, Elena's whisper, Daniel's uneasy presence, Greg's shifting eyes, threads knotted into a net, and I was already caught in the middle. I drove out to the clinic on the edge of town, a place with frosted glass windows and parking spaces lined with nervous cars. Inside, the wall smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a combination that tried too hard to convince people they were safe. The nurse explained everything in a voice that was soft but rehearsed. A simple blood draw from Elena would be enough to test the child's DNA against potential fathers. I didn't ask how the clinic had arranged her sample. Money buys discretion, and Elena was careless enough to leave papers unattended. All I needed was math, not mercy. When I left, the sky was low and gray, the kind that pressed on your shoulders. I drove past the old baseball field where Greg used to play as a boy. I remembered him running the bases with his hair sticking to his forehead, cheeks flushed, eyes shining like he believed every game could be won. I gripped the steering wheel hard. Somewhere along the line, he had traded that boyish hope for dice and cards, for late nights and phone calls he couldn't answer in front of me. That evening, Walter sat at the kitchen table sorting mail into neat stacks. He looked up when I came in, his face pale, lined deeper than the day before. "Martha," he said. "I never touched her, I swear it. But she knew about Greg. She knew enough to twist the knife." I poured myself coffee, though it was too late in the day. "You thought you could hold the dam long enough to keep us dry," I said. "But all you did was learn how to drown quietly." His eyes watered, though he tried to hide it by adjusting his glasses. He didn't argue, and that silence told me more than words ever could. Greg arrived unannounced just before dusk. He paced the living room, restless, avoiding the photograph on the mantel where he is 10 years old with frosting smeared across his smile. He spoke too quickly, about bonuses at work, about maybe buying a truck. The words didn't add up. When I asked directly, he crumbled. His hands shook as he admitted the truth. He was buried in gambling debt, chased by threats he couldn't outrun. I wanted to hold him, to tell him everything would be all right, but lies don't save men like Greg. Instead, I gave him a number for Gamblers Anonymous and told him it was time. His eyes filled, and he looked at me as if I had named the monster hiding under his bed. Walter reached for him then, and the three of us sat together in the quiet, the chandelier humming above like a witness. 2 days later, the courier arrived with the envelope. I waited for Walter before opening it. We stood side by side under that same chandelier, our shoulders nearly touching. The report was cold, clinical, unyielding. The probability that Walter was the father was 0. Daniel Ruiz, however, was listed with near certainty. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply exhaled, a long release that felt like glass finally settling into sand. Walter placed his hand over mine. "So now what?" he asked. "We invite the truth to dinner," I said. "This time, it sits at the head of the table." I set the table as if it were Christmas, polishing silver until it caught the chandelier's light and placing the wedding china like soldiers on parade. Walter lit candles, their flames trembling, reflecting our nerves. Greg arrived first, shoulders hunched, eyes swollen from nights that offered no rest. Elena swept in moments later, dressed carefully, her coat crisp, her smile a blade sheathed in charm. We ate salad in silence, each fork scraping louder than conversation. Elena commented on the dressing sweetly, as though nothing were wrong. Greg pushed tomatoes aside, the way he used to push peas across his plate when he was a boy. Walter poured water with a steady hand, but his jaw clenched tight. I stood before the roast was finished and went to the sideboard. The envelope with the DNA results rested under my palm, heavier than it had any right to be. I placed it at the center of the table. Lace framed it like a verdict. "We need to speak before dessert," I said. Elena tilted her chin, smiling as if she expected a speech she had already written. Greg kept his eyes on the table. Walter looked only at me, waiting for my lead. "Elena," I began, "you whispered in my ear that you carried my husband's child. You told him the same, and for that story, you accepted money. But here," I tapped the envelope, "is the truth." Elena didn't move, but her smile faltered. Greg reached across, pulled the paper free, and read. His breath caught. His eyes filled with disbelief, then anger. He turned to Elena. "It's Daniel's." Her mouth pressed shut, but silence was answer enough. Daniel entered then, at my invitation, his cap in hand, shame written across his face. He placed his phone on the table. Evidence plain, messages, receipts, pictures of moments shared when they thought no one was looking. Elena exhaled, shoulders straightening. "Yes," she said, "it's his." Greg's fist hit the table, rattling the glasses, but he did not shout. Instead, his voice cracked low. "You could have told me." Elena's eyes glistened. "You never listened," she whispered. Walter finally spoke, voice steady but worn. "I gave you money, Elena, but not my bed. I did it to shield my son, foolish as that was, and I am sorry." The room held its breath. Outside, the roses bent against the wind, tapping the glass like witnesses who longed to testify. Greg leaned back, pale, exhausted. "I'm going to that meeting tomorrow," he said. His voice was raw, but it carried weight. Elena placed both hands on her stomach, trembling. "What happens to me now?" "You find a lawyer," I said. "You and Daniel will decide how to raise that child. Greg will heal, and this house will stand." The chandelier hummed softly. The candles burned steady, and for the first time in months, I felt the walls exhale, as if the truth itself had opened a window. The morning after the dinner, the house felt hollow but lighter, as if someone had lifted a heavy trunk from the attic. Walter read the paper at the kitchen table, his coffee cooling untouched. His eyes lingered on words without meaning. He folded the paper once, then again, and finally set it aside. Greg called mid-morning. His voice trembled, raw but steady with determination. I went to the meeting. Mom, Gamblers Anonymous. I sat in a circle, and when it was my turn, I said my name out loud. I said what I was. His breath hitched. I was scared, but they clapped for me. Strangers. And I thought maybe this is where I start over. I pressed the phone close, eyes wet. "That's the bravest thing you've ever done, Greg. Keep showing up. That's all that matters now." Walter listened quietly from across the room, his hand clenched around his mug. When I hung up, he said, "He's stronger than I was at his age. I should have trusted that." Elena sent a message later that day. She had contacted an attorney, arranged to move in with her sister in a neighboring city. The tone was formal, stripped of warmth, but not cruel. She wrote that she intended to co-parent with Daniel, that she would handle her debts and clear her name legally. I stared at the screen a long time before replying with a single sentence. Take care of yourself and the child. It was the truth, and it was all I had left to give her. That weekend, Daniel came by. He stood on my porch with a paper bag of muffins, the same bakery bag Elena once carried. His hands shook as he offered it. "For everything I messed up," he said. His eyes were tired but open. "I want to do right by the baby and by you, I should have spoken sooner. You've spoken now, I told him. That matters more than silence. Walter invited him to sit, poured him coffee. For a brief moment, we three sat together, an old man, a tired gardener, and a woman who refused to let her house fall. The muffins sat untouched, but the gesture softened something in the air. Later, Walter brought me the porcelain wedding bowl, the one I'd carried since my mother gave it to me. He held it like an offering. "We'll keep it safe," he said. "No more secrets tucked inside." I touched his hand, lined and familiar. "We keep the bowl. We're careful what we put in it." That night, we walked around the neighborhood. Mrs. Omchitz. Keating waved from her porch, wrapped in a shawl. Teenagers sped by on scooters, loud and free. Walter paused outside the VFW hall, staring at the flyer for the pancake breakfast postponed until spring. He touched the paper gently, like a man who still believed in second chances. Back home. I reheated the apple pie that had waited quietly in the fridge since the night of truth. Walter cut 2 slices, and we ate under the chandelier's hum. The crust flaked, the cinnamon warmed my tongue, and for the first time in weeks, food tasted like food again, not suspicion. When I cleared the plates, Walter caught my hand. His eyes were wet but steady. "Thank you," he whispered. I squeezed back. "For what?" "For opening the door to the truth," he said, even when I was afraid to walk through it. The weeks that followed carried a different kind of silence, not the heavy silence of secrets, but the softer hush of a house catching its breath. Morning light seemed kinder, spilling across the kitchen floor as if it, too, was relieved. The chandelier no longer hummed like a warning. It glowed simply to light our dinners. Greg called often, sometimes from parking lots after meetings, sometimes late at night when temptation clawed at him. His voice cracked with shame, but also with honesty. "I didn't place a bet today," he'd say, and those words were victories. I told him I was proud, every single time. Elena kept her promise. She moved in with her sister and began sorting out her debts. Through her lawyer, she and Daniel arranged custody plans. It was complicated, messy, but real. Daniel stopped by once more to tend the roses. He knelt carefully among the thorns, pruning what was damaged so the blooms could come again. Watching him, I realized not every wrong choice means a ruined life. Some things, given care, I can grow back stronger. Walter grew quieter, but not with guilt, with gratitude. He lingered by windows, by my side, his hand brushing mine more often, as if words weren't enough. Sometimes we sat together on the porch in the evening, not talking, just listening to the crickets stitch the night together. Peace doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits down beside you and stays. One Sunday, I brought out the wedding bowl for dessert. Its porcelain gleamed in the candlelight. Walter smiled, a tired, tender smile, and said, "We kept it clean this time." I nodded, spooning apple cobbler into the bowl, and thought of all the things that had nearly shattered us. If someone asked what I learned, I would not recite morals like verses. I would simply say this: tell the truth before the lies multiply, bake the pie even when no one feels hungry, and keep the bowl safe. Because families, like bowls, can crack under pressure, but with care and with courage, they can hold again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day